Welcome to the other side of Lucy Letby. In episode 93, we're going to have another look at this claim that Lucy Letby was involved in harming babies at Liverpool Women's Hospital by purposefully dislodging their endotracheal tubes and causing so-called unplanned extubations. We are led to believe by the Panorama programme that this is still an ongoing police investigation. Cheshire Police have hinted that this is an ongoing police investigation, and they always refer to ongoing investigations whenever they're asked to comment. But personally, I think this is a dead duck investigation, if it ever was an investigation to begin with. And we're going to look at why I think this is a dead duck investigation. So the first thing we have to do is to be clear what Michelle Turner, who was the chief of people or the head of HR in Liverpool Women's Hospital in June, July 2015, 2016. And we'll recall from paragraph 58 of her statement to the Thirlwell Inquiry, which reads, all QIS, so that's quality in specialty or qualification in specialty students, worked long days, 12.5-hour shifts, including weekend shifts. This was in 2015. Liverpool Women's Hospital have been unable to locate rotas to substantiate the exact dates. Letby undertook her second placement at Liverpool Women's Hospital. The trust provided swipe access, but this data was lost during a system upgrade. We are, however, aware, following a review undertaken in April 2019 by Dr. Yoxel, Clinical Director of Neonatology, that Letby worked for 15 shifts during the period 14th of January 2015 to 14th of February 2015, 11 of which were in the intensive care area. Dr. Yoxel was requested to undertake this review by Cheshire Police in order to identify if there were any specific incidents that caused concern around the time Letby was on the unit. The findings from this review were shared with Cheshire Police. Cheshire Investigation Report 42/2019, and there is reference also to further detailed case note review. So, in 2019, 6 years ago, Dr. Yoxel was asked to carry out this investigation. 6 years later, in spite of the fact that Cheshire Police have even more reason to believe that Lucy Letby harmed babies in Liverpool Women's Hospital in 2015, they still haven't charged her with anything. That's 6 years after this report was done. Now, we'll return to this Thirlwell Inquiry statement later on in the podcast, and we'll now go to Dr. Yoxel's statement given to the Thirlwell Inquiry. And the name Yoxel is a perfect example of why England is such a really interesting country and with a fabulous culture and history to it. So the name Yoxel originates from Anglo-Saxon times, which is probably why it has that strange feel to it. It's actually Old English, English as it was spoken before William the Conqueror, 1066, and all of that. And when William the Conqueror conquered England, he did a land registry thing, a population census and ownership called the Domesday Book. And that is where we get the first mention of the name Yoxel. Yoxall. And Yoxel is made up of two parts in Old English, which sound strangely, one part sounds strangely Gaelic to me, and that's Geoch. And Geoch means yoke, so you yoke the oxen with the big wooden thing so that you can get the oxen to pull the plough. And the how is the second part of it, and that's a nook or the corner of a field, and that's a secluded area enough to be ploughed by one team of oxen. So you have the yoke for one team of oxen, and that was where the name Yoxall came from. Nothing to do with Lucy Letby, of course, but interesting nonetheless. So let's have a look at Dr. Yoxall's statement to the Thirlwell inquiry. And again, all of this is from a medical perspective. The statement is very long. It starts off with his training, etc., what his roles were and all of that type of thing. But we're going to look at specific parts of it, and I'll leave you a link. You can read the whole statement if you wish. So in paragraph 4, during my time as a consultant at Liverpool Women's Hospital, I spent 9 years as the clinical director of the neonatal unit. From March 2010, I was therefore the clinical director of the neonatal unit during 2015 and 2016. In this role, I was part of the neonatal unit management team, responsible for day-to-day operational issues, as well as longer-term strategic development of the service. I was responsible for appointing and managing the consultant team and had responsibilities for the neonatal budget. I was responsible for overseeing the management of clinical incidents and monitoring neonatal units' clinical standards. So, a very important role, you would agree. Paragraph 5. I was a member of various committees in the hospital during my time at Liverpool Women's Hospital and represented the trust at various local and regional committees, including the Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network Steering Group. I was also a member of the British Association of Perinatal Medicine, the Neonatal Society, and the British Medical Association. Paragraph 8. Since retirement, I have continued to act in various medical roles. I completed several research and clinical improvement projects that were ongoing at the time of my retirement and have been published as peer-review articles. I have a medical legal practice, so he's an expert witness, producing reports for the court, mostly in relation to medical negligence claims, but also for His Majesty's Coroner. In addition, I did some paid work for Cheshire Constabulary, examining neonatal notes from the Countess of Chester Hospital to assist in the identification of any potential cases that should be investigated further in relation to Project Hummingbird, or Operation Hummingbird, as we know it, or the Golden Thread, as I call it. I performed this work between July 21st and February 23rd. So, by paragraph 8, we have a very extensive resume of this man's achievements in life and medicine, and we know that he worked for Operation Hummingbird in a paid capacity. Now, I think I've mentioned before that in another part of my life, I worked as the medical director or medical advisor to the Complaints Committee and the medical legal protection of doctors. So it was both quality control on the patient's part and as a reviewer of complaints against doctors. So I would have worked with lawyers and medical defence people, so there are people who indemnify doctors. And when a complaint arose against a doctor, I was the kind of medical advocate initially for the patient making the complaint. So it was my role to ensure that when meetings were held or information was discussed or anything to do with the complaint relating to the medical content of the complaint, it was my role to make sure that that medical content was accurate, or as accurate as it could be. So the whole purpose of this role that I was in was to represent the patient in a very quick, what could be a very quick process. So when you make a complaint in any health service, it can take months to reach any resolution of that complaint. Now, if somebody made a complaint that was a very serious complaint, say for instance, they alleged that a doctor in a consultation had assaulted them, we wouldn't have dealt with any complaint on that basis. That would have been kicked straight to the police. Now, we would have provided support to people during the whole process, but we wouldn't have investigated anything like that. Had there been a death or a very adverse outcome to a consultation with a GP in the out-of-hours service, we wouldn't have dealt with that either. We would have kicked that to a higher authority to deal with that. Now again, we would have done our own investigation. We would have come to our own view based on the evidence that we had as to whether or not we agreed that the outcome could have been avoided. But the purpose of that was for education, learning, quality control and improvement of the service. So we would have dealt with a lot of complaints. And one of the first things that we would have made sure when we were dealing with the complaints was that there was no conflict of interest in any of the witnesses giving evidence or opinions to us. And that was the very strong legal advice that we got at the time, as I recall. And whatever witness you're going to use to maintain your position, that the complaint was either valid or invalid, you better make sure that none of the evidence that you used was given by anyone who had a conflict of interest unless they declared that conflict of interest. And even if the person declared the conflict of interest, we would generally ask them not to take part in the investigation or the oversight anymore, and we would get someone else that could do just the same job. Because the lawyers told us basically that conflict of interests should be attacked in court, and witnesses who have conflicts of interest are not good witnesses, either as a defence witness or as a prosecution witness. So you want to avoid conflict of interest in everything you do, because good defence barristers or good prosecutors will make mincemeat out of a witness who has a conflict of interest. So I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm not suggesting it, but I'm going to leave it up to you as a fair-minded person listening to this, whether or not you think that Dr. Yoxall had a conflict of interest when he worked for Operation Hummingbird in a paid role. So he certainly had an interest, but whether or not this was a conflicting or conflicted interest is a hypothetical question, because he was never part of the trial, and we're only talking about a hypothetical situation that Cheshire Police keep pushing, that he obviously would be part of a trial arising from potential unplanned extubations caused by Lucy Letby in Liverpool Women's Hospital and uncovered in the 2019 investigation. Dr. Yoxall would be part of that trial. The question is, would he be conflicted as part of that trial? And would this give Lucy Letby's defence an angle of attack against the accusations? And in my opinion, from my experience, it most definitely would. And we're going to look at why I think that is. And we can see that in paragraph 5 that he was a member of various committees, but he represented the trust at various local and regional committees, including the Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network Steering Group. And in paragraph 9, he gives us an insight into that. So Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network, CMNN, is a network of 8 neonatal units: Liverpool Women's Hospital, Arrow Park, Ormskirk, Winston, Warrington, Countess of Chester Hospital, Macclesfield and Leighton, with an additional surgical neonatal unit at Alderhead Children's Hospital. Although neonatal networks were established in 2004, they were in a state of transition during 2015 and 16. Now, I find that very interesting, that they were in a state of transition. Neonatal operational delivery networks were being established in England in 2015. The Northwest Operational Delivery Network was established to cover the areas previously covered by 3 clinical neonatal networks: Cheshire and Merseyside, Greater Manchester, and Lancashire and South Cumbria. So we have a situation here that since 2004, we've had a way of doing things. We've had a routine. We've had a way of transferring babies. We've had a criteria for transferring babies. We're used to the type of babies we transfer, etc., etc. And in 2015, that's all torn apart in a transition. And it doesn't matter whether the transition is well planned, whether it's not well planned. You're moving from one way of doing things to another way of doing things. And the health service is no different than any other organization. When you're in this transition phase, you are in a dangerous phase of delivering very important decisions and making sure that those decisions are acted upon in the way that's going to create the best outcome. That is now in more doubt than it was previously. The goal, obviously, of reorganizing the network is to improve things in the long run, but it is not necessarily going to do that in the short run. And it might just be part of the explanation for why Countess of Chester Hospital Neonatal Unit was taking so many sick babies, because the operational delivery network was in a state of flux. And this would be a massive operational front to open against prosecution in any defence of Lucy Letby. Dr. Yoxall would be required to provide data and evidence of a change in pattern of transfer, etc., pre-2015 and post-2015. So he would become involved deeply in the trial, not only as a doctor, but as the Trust's representative to this changeover in the system that occurred right at the time that this cluster of deaths occurred in the Countess of Chester Hospital, for which many doctors believe the real reason was that the babies were in the wrong hospital. They were at the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's very likely that this change or this transition into a new system for where these babies should be had at least some bearing on that. So part of the defence of Lucy Letby in the very unlikely case of these unplanned extubations that occurred in Liverpool Women's Hospital would be an attack. The defence would attack, in my opinion, would attack Dr. Yoxall for conflict of interest on that basis alone, being the Trust's representative. So in paragraph 11, he says, the NICUs were responsible for the care of babies who needed intensive care. Full stop. This included the most premature babies, babies with severe infections, life-threatening malformations, or severe birth asphyxia. Babies who were expected to require intensive care, including those below 27 weeks gestation at birth, were planned to be delivered at one of the NICUs. Now you'll note that it says including those babies below 27 weeks of gestation. But the main part of this sentence is babies who were expected to require intensive care. So again, in defence of Lucy Letby, that's going to open up a minefield and result in the relitigation of the Lucy Letby trial for all her indictments. If Cheshire Police were ever to go after Lucy Letby for unplanned extubations, they would have to call Dr. Yoxall as a witness for the prosecution, because he's the one that carried out the investigation on behalf of Operation Hummingbird. Now, I know that they've moved that on now to Operation Duet, but that doesn't make any difference. He was the Trust's medical advisor at the time when the Letby series of babies died. Mostly, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other people, like Dr. Modi, particularly Dr. Modi, that these babies were in the wrong hospital. They should never have been in the County Chest Hospital. Now, to finish off paragraph 11, he does say, obviously, this was not always possible. So all units had to have the capacity to resuscitate and stabilise babies who were sick prior to transfer to a NICU for intensive care if required. And he says that local neonatal units could provide care for babies who unexpectedly required intensive care for less than 48 hours. All other babies were supposed to be cared for at Liverpool Women's Hospital or Arrow Park Hospital. All other babies were supposed to be cared for at Liverpool Women's Hospital or Arrow Park Hospital. So, if you're not a local neonatal unit and you have to deliver a baby, you have to be organising the transfer of that baby immediately. And we know from the RCPCH report into the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016 that they were not a local neonatal unit. The RCPCH report specifically states that the Countess of Chester Hospital was staffed to provide special care. So they were a level 1 unit. They were not a level 2 unit. They were never a level 2 unit. And therefore, this is where the defence would go, and indeed where the defence should have gone in the Lucy Letby trial, but where it would definitely go if there was the very unlikely event that Cheshire Police brought extra charges against Lucy Letby. They would be attacked full on. Dr. Yoxall would be attacked full on, I would imagine, as being the Trust's advisor as to how Countess Chester Hospital ever got the designation of local neonatal unit when the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health say it was not a local neonatal unit. That would be a very big problem, and it would cause absolute mayhem in the court. It opens up so many doors, so many avenues of defence that a wise prosecutor wouldn't want to go there. So that's got nothing to do with Dr. Yoxall deciding. He didn't decide, or we don't know how it was decided that Countess Chester Hospital was a local neonatal unit. But we know from the Royal College report that they weren't a local neonatal unit. So you can just imagine the defence of Lucy Letby in that scenario would be brutal to these administrators and these advisors to the Trust and the Trust. What were they doing? How did it end up that a hospital like the Countess of Chester Hospital was taking babies that were 800 grams weight, 28 weeks gestation with pneumonia, when they weren't a local neonatal unit? And the no way out of that line of defence for the prosecution is that Dr. Yoxall wouldn't be able to answer that question any other way than to say they should not have been born at a non-local neonatal unit. In paragraph 12 he says, the NICU at Liverpool Women's Hospital was the largest of the 2 NICUs and did the bulk of the intensive care work for the network, including all of the care for babies with life-threatening malformations or surgical and cardiac problems. But he's saying here they did the bulk of the intensive care. So what is going to happen to your network if you remove Liverpool Women's Hospital from the network, effectively remove Liverpool Women's Hospital from the network? What are the outcomes for the network going to be? And I wouldn't want to be the person that would try and defend that situation, how that was allowed to have happened in this transition, why there was no provision for the failure of Liverpool Women's Hospital, why were the plans not in place for such an event. In my opinion, Any prosecution of Lucy Letby with regards to these unplanned extubations and all the rest of it is going to bring all of these questions to the fore. And they're not readily answerable, these questions. It's hard to know how you could defend that happening. So let's see if it did happen. Oddly enough, for me anyway, it says in paragraph 13, the relationship between Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital at the time was generally very good. So if you have a very good relationship between two hospitals, surely you know what the setup is in these two hospitals. Surely you know that the Countess of Chester Hospital is not really a local neonatal unit, because you know that there aren't two separate rosters for intensive care and mainstream pediatrics. That's a requirement of a local neonatal unit, and that wasn't there. There wasn't a specialist in neonatology at the Countess of Chester Hospital, and that's a requirement for the local neonatal unit. So how can you have good relationships between Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital and not know that? Particularly if you are the trust's advisor on the setup of a new network. But he carries on. If a consultant at the Countess of Chester Hospital was caring for a baby and needed more expert advice on the care of that baby, they could and did call the neonatology consultant on call at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Sometimes a registrar on call at Countess of Chester Hospital would call a Liverpool Women's Hospital consultant. This was always done at the request of and with the knowledge of the Countess of Chester Hospital consultant. So there you go. And we'll see how this, in my opinion, could become a problem for an expert witness that was once an advisor to the trust and had good relationships with the Countess of Chester Hospital, but was also someone who was making clinical decisions on the part of Liverpool Women's Hospital in their relationship with the Countess of Chester Hospital. And we'll see some of that as we go forward with this, and how it would be a devastating position to defend in any legal action against Liverpool Women's Hospital. In my opinion, this is a theoretical, hypothetical situation to point out why I think that unplanned extubations, number one, we don't have any evidence for that. And number two, even if Cheshire Police thought that they had evidence for that, it would be a very difficult prosecution because of the witnesses. He says, it was not our practice in Liverpool Women's Hospital prior to 2016 to make a record of the advice that we gave. So why prior to 2016 it wasn't their practice, but after 2016 it was their practice, is what this implies. In mid-2016, that would have been July, whatever, sometime around that time, around the baby P time, Liverpool Women's Hospital introduced a system of making our own record of any advice given. Now, again, for someone who has worked in medical legal medicine only on the fringes of it, but has had many conversations with people who work full-time in the medical legal defence industry, I find it very difficult to understand why a person like Dr. Yoxall wouldn't be making his own contemporaneous notes for anything that was said or any advice that was given to the Countess of Chester Hospital by him in his role as on-call consultant for the bulk intensive care provider for the entire network. And I'm pretty sure that the indemnity people, the Medical Defence Union or the Medical Protection Society, the lawyers that advise doctors when they're in trouble, would not have liked the setup whereby a consultant was giving advice to junior doctors that they didn't necessarily know in a hospital that they didn't work in, but they weren't keeping any record of it, no contemporaneous record of what they said. And perhaps it was the MPS or another organisation like that advised them to put the new system into place in 2016, because this system required, not left them with the option, but it required that we record the details of the call received and advice given during a standard pro forma with an S-bar, situation, background, assessment, recommendation, layout. So that's pretty detailed. That isn't advice like, I don't think you should be doing that. No, that's an earthquake equivalent upgrade. And these pro forma situations that they were dealing with were then stored in a shared folder on the Liverpool Women's Hospital computer network, accessible to all neonatal consultants. So overnight, sometime in mid-2016, in the midst of all of this mayhem, we get a situation where we go from no record taking to shared folders, situation, background, assessment, recommendations, and accessibility to all neonatal consultants. A major upgrade from a very poor standard before that. Paragraph 14. If it was deemed that a baby required an uplift to intensive care, then after this was agreed between consultants. And that's again a second statement of that. This is not consultant to junior doctor, this is consultant to consultant. After this consultant to consultant consultation, the neonatal transport team would be contacted and a transfer would be instigated. The preferred NICU for the Countess of Chester Hospital was Arrow Park, as this was closer than Liverpool Women's Hospital, and it was decided that this would be easier for parents. Yeah, and that's all very aspirational and all very neat and tidy, but it doesn't take away from the fact in the previous statement that Liverpool Women's Hospital provided the bulk of the intensive care. So it was the bulwark, it was the redundancy, the reserve, for when things didn't go the way you wanted them to go. He goes on to say, some babies were still transferred to Liverpool Women's Hospital due to capacity problems at Arrow Park or because of the nature of the medical condition. Example, the need for cardiac surgery or surgical interventions. Sometimes if a consultant in the Countess of Chester Hospital wanted to transfer a baby for intensive care, they would contact the on-call consultant for the neonatal transport team directly, and that team would arrange the transfer, including the location that the baby was being moved to. Now, you see, the word here is would arrange. So if a consultant wanted to transfer a baby for intensive care, all they had to do was contact the consultant on call for the transport team, and the baby would be moved. That is pretty unequivocal. That is how the system was set up. That is what you would have to defend in any case going forward, big picture, as Judith would say, against Lucy Letby. All of this Thirlwell inquiry stuff would be dragged out into the open to explain why all of this stuff failed in 2015 and 2016 at the Countess of Chester Hospital, because it did fail. Just to reiterate it again, because it's very important for him to offload any responsibility from himself back to the Countess of Chester Hospital. And he does this in this statement, but he would also have to do it in court, because it isn't what happened. In paragraph 15, he says, subsequently it was agreed that all transfers would be arranged by a telephone conference which included the referring consultant, the receiving consultant, and the transport consultant. And again, that's all very aspirational and very good. And then he says he cannot clearly recall when that process was introduced, but I believe it was after 2015 or 2016. Well, any court case is not going to settle on I believe. It was after 2015 or 2016, and he's going to have to answer the question, why was it allowed to wait until after 2015 and 2016 to put in place this new proper system that wasn't in place in 2015 and 2016. And then in paragraph 16, in my role as a consultant and clinical director of Liverpool Women's Hospital, I attended various committee meetings in relationship to the Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network. I was a member of the steering committee for the Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network and attended meetings regularly. These meetings took place on a quarterly basis. The group included 2 representatives from each of the units in the network director, network clinical lead, and other officers and administrative support. There was also a parent representative. The aim was for members to attend at least 75% of the meetings, but from recollection, attendance was generally inconsistent. So again, what would happen in a theoretical case that brought up all the stuff from Liverpool Women's Hospital? It would be asked, or I would certainly as a barrister be asking, how come a member of the steering group who attended meetings regularly didn't know that the Countess of Chester Hospital wasn't a local neonatal unit, that it was only a special care unit? That was its proper designation. How come that proper designation fell through the cracks, and the downgrade that happened in 2016 after all of these deaths wouldn't have happened or shouldn't have happened because they should never have been a local neonatal unit, which was the conclusion of the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health? Does all of this call into question the effectiveness, the due diligence of the steering group? That would certainly become part of the defence in any future charges against Lucy Letby, and it would result in the relitigation of Lucy Letby's trial. And to be fair to Dr. Yoxall, because this isn't really about Dr. Yoxall in that sense, in paragraph 17 he said, I was not a member of the clinical effectiveness group and did not attend any of those meetings. I would therefore be unable to comment about any of the minutes formulated as a result of those particular meetings. Paragraph 18, I was also not a member of the Operational Delivery Network Board and did not attend any of those meetings. And then, as usual, with statements and not cross-examination, we get paragraph 19, which says, as a member of the Cheshire and Merseyside Neonatal Network, I also participated in the surgical interest group and participated in projects to develop the future configuration of surgical and intensive care services across the network. I do not consider that work or those committees to have any relevance to the inquiry's terms of reference. What inquiry? Presumably, to me reading that, this means the RCPCH inquiry. And whereas that might be correct, that it wasn't in the terms of reference of that inquiry, it would certainly be in the terms of reference of any future trial of Lucy Letby. So there wouldn't be any get out of jail free card for any of these people in that scenario. It's interesting if you read paragraph 21 and 22, and then we get to paragraph 23. There was no agreed standardised method for conducting neonatal mortality reviews. At Liverpool Women's Hospital, we had a standard method and reviewed all deaths. It was my understanding that a summary of each of the mortality reviews was presented to the clinical effectiveness group, but there was no other requirement for us to share the results of those reviews externally as a routine. If we considered that an individual death had occurred because of a serious unexpected incident, SUI, we would report this to the local clinical commissioning group and share any subsequent investigations. I do not know what system was in use for conducting mortality reviews at the Countess of Chester Hospital at the time, although the requirement to report all SUIs to their local CCG would have been the same. So where are all the reports then that were sent about these serious or these sudden unexpected incidents from the Countess of Chester Hospital to their local clinical coordinating group. Where are these? I've never seen them. They would be looking for them at any trial that involved Dr. Yoxall as a witness. Then in the next several paragraphs, he goes on to distance himself from any understanding of what was going on in the Countess of Chester Hospital because it didn't involve any of his roles, which is fair enough for a statement. But the detail of all of this, where was this information going, how often was it going, etc., would definitely become part of any future trial of Lucy Letby, therefore relitigation of what happened in 2015-2016, and any future investigation into what actually happened at the Countess of Chester Hospital. And then he gives a completely different set of data on the mortality. So in 2015 to 2016, we have Q1, 3 deaths, Q2, 3 deaths, Q3, 2 deaths, Q4, 3 deaths. And 2016 to 2017, we have Q1, 2 deaths. But yet, we have the indictment of Lucy Letby beginning with baby A in June of 2015. So that doesn't include any of the deaths in Q1 of his data table. So the data table that he has doesn't really match up with other data tables that I've seen. So again, we would have to go into all of that in a relitigation of Lucy Letby's actions or otherwise in Liverpool Women's Hospital or the Countess of Chester. And the rest of the paragraphs after this go into more excusing why this information is not really readily available in his statement. But in paragraph 39, he says, the quarterly data report shows that the number of deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital was lower than the number at the 2 NICUs. Well, of course, it's going to be lower than at the 2 NICUs. And he goes on to say that on balance, I think that had this data been properly considered, this would have prompted a discussion and an explanation from the Countess of Chester Hospital would have been requested. Unfortunately, it appears that the quarterly data report was not discussed in any detail at the meetings of the 29th of January 2016, and it was not presented to the steering group with the agenda prior to the meeting so that they could read it and consider it in advance. So why was it not reported to the steering group? That's the only question I have. Why not? We had a hospital full of very suspicious doctors in Chester who believed that there was a nurse murdering babies. But January 29th, 2016, they didn't tell anybody, at least local steering groups, and it's on balance a problem. Paragraph 40, we get to May 2016. There's still no quarterly data report available for the CMNN steering group meeting on that date, when our suspicions about Lucy Letby are entering the frenetic stage. Why is there no report to the steering committee? Paragraph 43, I am of course hugely disappointed that patterns or rates of mortality at the Countess of Chester Hospital were not identified by the CMNN steering group during this period. If an individual or group had been aware of an increased mortality rate, then it would have been their duty to raise those concerns. Yes, indeed it would have, particularly if they thought they had a nurse murdering babies on their unit. So as I say, the whole statement is worth reading. Then we get to paragraph 45. I can confirm that I was consultant on duty for the NICU at the Liverpool Women's Hospital on the 10th of June 2015. Any request for advice from the Countess of Chester Hospital neonatal team on that date would have been answered by me. I have no recollection, however, of any discussions that day. As referenced above, it was not my practice at the time to make a contemporaneous record of advice given. That won't survive very long in court if my experience of court is anything to go by. Paragraph 46, I have no reason to doubt that what Dr. Ogden and Dr. Letby have written is an accurate reflection of their understanding of our conversations. Well, because you didn't write any records of what you said, you have no option but to accept what these other doctors said. Paragraph 47. Dr. Letby had noted a management plan in the medical records on June the 10th. DW discussed with specialists at Alderhay and NNU at Liverpool regards events overnight. He also reiterates this in his witness statement. It appears that Dr. Letby delegated this task to Dr. Ogden, his junior colleague, as he does not record the outcome of the discussion. In his further statement, it also implies that the communication with other specialists was delegated to Dr. Ogden. Paragraph 48. Dr. Letby has stated that the consultants at Liverpool Women's Hospital felt that the death of baby A probably, as was not due to, this would be the antiphospholipid syndrome, as he had not seen it before. Now, why that would be a reason to say that something wasn't the case, I don't know, but it seems to be a common theme. I haven't seen that rash before, therefore it must be this. Or because I haven't seen that disease before, it can't be that. This seems to be a specialty. In my experience, it's a specialty of this unit or this area. But I've never heard people talk like that before. The reason for not believing that the death was caused by irrelevant and sensitive INS is taken from the case notes entry made by Dr. Ogden. I believe that this entry is an oversimplification of my opinion. My reason for not thinking that maternal INS, or as we know, APS, was the cause of the problem was not just because I had not seen it before, but would have been based on the description of the clinical events that I was given and my knowledge of the presentation of the clinical manifestations of maternal INS, maternal APS. But where is the mention of his discussion with the consultant at the Countess of Chester Hospital? Because it was consultant to consultant. That was what the deal was supposed to be, not consultant to junior doctors. And again, whether or not that was in place at the time, or was put in place in 2016 for some odd reason, after all of these babies had died, it wouldn't survive an examination in court. Why did you not speak to the consultant? Did you not think that 28-week twins to a mother with the notoriously dangerous antiphospholipid syndrome was really a suitable patient for the Countess of Chester Hospital? In paragraph 50, there's some more discussion about this case. Quote, Dr. Ogden has noted that I recommended that the team at the Countess of Chester Hospital consider sepsis or a metabolic disorder as an explanation for what was happening. And you'll recall from earlier that sepsis and infection was supposed to be treated in Liverpool Women's Hospital. But what in the name of God would a local neonatal unit that wasn't a local neonatal unit be dealing with metabolic disorders? I have no idea. These are common causes of unexpected collapse or death in preterm babies. So this appears to have been a reasonable suggestion. Now, can you imagine what that statement, that paragraph, that statement from Dr. Yoxel is going to do to any re-litigation of the Letby trial? That not only is it well known that unexpected collapses and death do occur in preterm babies, but the common causes of them are sepsis and metabolic disorders. And baby A, remember, was already diagnosed with sepsis. In paragraph 51, it appears that I did not have enough information to offer a diagnosis or meaningful management in treatment, but suggested that they perform a cranial ultrasound and await the results of a post-mortem examination. So these phone calls are all after the event. What was going on here? These are the questions that a new trial into Lucy Letby causing harm at Liverpool Women's Hospital will result in. If Dr. Yoxel is a witness in that trial, which there wouldn't be any choice to avoid. There'd be no way to avoid him being a witness in the trial. Paragraph 54. Dr. Ogden made a note entry at 1700 hours, June 2015, shortly after baby C was admitted to the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital, saying that the baby was to be discussed with Liverpool Women's Hospital due to its weight. But again, where is the discussion between the consultants? Why are the consultants at the Countess of Chester Hospital not dealing with the baby who is 800 grams, 28 weeks gestation, 800 grams, and has pneumonia at birth? What was that baby doing in the Countess of Chester Hospital? Paragraph 55. Dr. Brunton has made a case note entry at 1800 hours on June 2015, which states, discussed with Dr. Yoxall, retransfer as less than 800 grams. So the 800 gram limit that was put to the jury in court is now gone. The baby is less than 800 grams and therefore meets the criteria for transfer to the neonatal unit. At 6 o'clock on the day it was born, unequivocally, there's no getting away from that. Yet that transfer did not take place. Paragraph 55 continues, he has recorded that my advice was that I was happy for the baby to remain at the Countess of Chester Hospital at that time, but to rediscuss it if there was any deterioration. And I would want to know why, as a parent, I would want to know why a senior doctor in the best hospital in the region wanted to wait until there was deterioration before they did anything. Now, there's no guarantee that there's going to be deterioration, but that's exactly how a parent is going to think. If a parent reads this, oh, just hold on and see what happens. That is what a parent is going to think. Why did they not act earlier? Paragraph 56. Dr. Saladi has also described these discussions in his witness statement, though he did not take part in them. He has also stated that babies at 27 weeks gestation and below, or with a birth weight of 800 grams and below, would be transferred to the regional centre, by which he means a NICU. From my recollection, there was no agreed weight limit below which babies had to be transferred to a NICU. Well, that's not what the jury at Lucy Letby's trial was told. That's not what the British Association of Perinatal Medicine guidelines of 2016 stated. But again, we come back to why is it junior doctors are communicating with the most senior doctor in the region and not the consultant. They're not experienced enough to pass on what they're seeing. They're not experienced enough to see what they should be seeing. And the most senior doctor in the region hasn't taken any records of what these junior doctors told him about the baby. All of that would have to take place. These discussions would have to be heard again, cross-examination to death on the stand, if there was ever any retrial of Lucy Letby. Paragraph 57. At the time of the telephone conversation with me, based on what is in the case notes, the baby was not ventilated. That was at the time of the phone call. And although the birth weight was low at 800 grams, the baby did not meet the gestation criteria mandating immediate transfer. The fact that the baby was not ventilated suggests that prolonged intensive care was unlikely. So it seems reasonable to have not transferred the baby at that time. This is what Dr. Yoxall says in his statement. But we now know that the Countess of Chester Hospital was not a local neonatal unit. And any barrister involved in this case in the defence of Lucy Letby is not going to be reasonable in the assumption that baby C should have been transferred. They're going to be the opposite of reasonable. And the paragraph finishes off with, if a need for ongoing intensive care had become apparent in subsequent hours or days, we would have transferred this baby at that point. But what happened was the baby C died in the following days. So that discussion didn't take place. Why not? Baby C died according to diary evidence, by injection of air into the stomach. Was that ever part of Dr. Yoxel's differential diagnosis in his head? Did he know about the pneumonia? Did he know that this baby had widespread hypoxic ischemic damage to the heart and myocardium due to lung disease with maternal vascular underperfusion as a contributory factor? And the maternal underperfusion, because of the small growth, the retarded growth in utero, was the main cause of the widespread hypoxia or lack of oxygen in the heart, was the main cause of death in this child. The child may have been able to recover, but it would definitely have needed intensive care. And when you put pneumonia on top of that, the child had no chance of recovering without intensive care. Did Dr. Yoxel know all of that when he was advising junior doctors in the Countess of Chester Hospital? These are the type of questions that will arise in any future litigation against Lucy Letby. But not only were the transfers from the Countess of Chester Hospital to Liverpool Women's Hospital not happening when they should have happened, as the RCPCH report said, the care of these babies was not escalated. There was actually a flow of traffic the other direction. Liverpool Women's Hospital were sending babies to the Countess of Chester Hospital. So if we return to Michelle Turner's statement, this is the HR Chief of People in Liverpool Women's Hospital. Her statement, paragraph 77, on the 25th of July 2015, the mother was informed that the neonatal unit was closed due to there being no neonatal cot on the NICU at Liverpool Women's Hospital. So the bulk of the intensive care for that network was closed in July 2015. That's the first time anybody said that I've heard of. So baby E and baby F, twins, were sent ultimately to the Countess of Chester Hospital. Why? Paragraph 82. The mother of baby E and baby F was transferred to the Countess of Chester Hospital at 29 plus 5 weeks gestational age. Twins. Why did that happen? And we're back to the same thing again. In paragraph 82, the Countess of Chester Hospital was in 2015 designated as a local neonatal unit. Well, it may have been designated as a local neonatal unit, but it wasn't staffed as a local neonatal unit. It was staffed as a special care unit. Why did no one know that? Paragraph 84. In 2015, the transfer of mothers from Liverpool Women's Hospital to another hospital to deliver was uncommon. Transfer out was based upon the availability of cots in the neonatal unit. Paragraph 85. Between the 1st of July and the 31st of August, there were 9 women identified, transferred from Liverpool Women's Hospital to another trust. And if you read on through this report, baby E, baby F, baby G, baby I had links in some way or other with Liverpool Women's Hospital, which was overburdened at that particular time. So despite the trial, despite the speculation, despite the thorough inquiry, there are still so many unanswered questions about Lucy Letby and Liverpool Women's Hospital, this network, what was going on between the Countess of Chester Hospital and the network. Why was there no mortality reporting? It's endless. It just keeps going on and on and on. And the whole point of this podcast is to say that I don't believe for 1 second, no matter what Judith Morris wants to say to sell a few books, that Cheshire Police are ever going to go near this case again, because doing so is going to open all of this up. Liverpool Women's Hospital has an exemplary reputation. Dr. Yoxel has an exemplary reputation. Everything that he did in his working life, he did for the best of good reasons. His standing in the medical community would be stellar. It would be off the scale for everything that he's contributed in his life to the care of preterm babies, to the education of doctors. He is an exemplary figure for the NHS. Why in the name of God would a man who's retired with such a stellar record want to put himself through all of this again? For what reason? When he would have to answer all of these questions at the hands of a brutal defence barrister. In my opinion, it's never going to happen. It's not fair to Lucy Letby. It's not fair to the mothers. It's definitely not fair to Dr. Yoxall. But hey, if it sells another few books for Judith Moritz, for Dim and Dimmer, you never know. The world is a crazy place and getting crazier. So I would advise you that are interested in all of this to read these 2 Thirlwell inquiry documents. I also know from reading this myself that Lady Thirlwell won't have a clue what she's doing when she comes to compile a report. You'll be no better off. Thirlwell inquiry, complete waste of money, complete waste of time. If you really want to know, there's going to have to be people other than lawyers involved in trying to find out how all of this happened. But anyway, we'll end this podcast here. I hope you got something from it. I hope you can see how complex all of this stuff is and how little understanding of the reality of medicine and the practice of medicine that Moritz and Coffey have. Dim and Dimmer, when their new book comes out, don't touch it. So we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.